Hi, I'm Anna,
Hi, I'm Naishali.
I'm Elena.
And I'm Daphne.
and the film we're going to be discussing today is Out of the Past, which was filmed in 1947, and it's directed by, and bear with me because it's a French name, and I take Spanish, Jacques. I'm gonna butcher that in American because I can't pronounce that. But basically, the plot of this film is there's this like gas station attendant man, Jeff Bailey, who we find out has this like dark hidden past that he is forced to return to because he basically has a debt to this like gangster named Wit, played by Kirk Douglas, which is very interesting to me. And he runs into like this, in that he runs with a woman he was like madly in love with who betrayed him. And it's just, there's so many plots and everything, but it's also very interesting because you hear a lot of turns of phrases you never heard before. And the dialogue in this film is bizarre for 2021. So we're going to discuss that. So on that, the first thing we're going to be discussing is like the idioms and like weird turns of phrases that they discuss and that they say in the film. Um, and I will be taking that part, but obviously we're all going to be discussing it together as a group. And my favorite one is when Bailey says to Kathy, I think he says, "You're like a leaf, the wind blows from one gutter to another." I'm just like, first of all, that is such an insult, and I just like I've never heard someone call someone a leaf, and then usually when you like say someone's like when you use the word gutter when referring to someone, it means like trash and like not nice, but it's like such like a pretty phrase of a leaf blowing, but it also means she's like trash.
Yeah, I think it's no secret that he doesn't really like her
Yeah.
after
This
the
is
whole like Mexico affair.
this is like after he's, like found out that she's a little bit crazy and, like she falls into the category of Nora woman that like when they come into the protagonist's life, they immediately ruin it.
Yeah, like a wrecking ball.
I
Oh,
feel like I feel like film noir kind of uses these sentences and kind of like I guess less in this exact sentence. It's not poetic, but the way it's worded is pretty poetic. And I feel like they do this to add like that sense of kind of nostalgia and like drama. Another sentence I had kind of like that one written down was when Jeff was talking about Kathy when they had to separate, and he said what was left of that day was gone away like a pack of cigarettes. And I feel like there's a lot of like comparisons of like people and actions with like objects.
Yeah, when I was like watching it, I just noticed like just a lot of terminology that I like either wasn't familiar with or wasn't familiar with being used in an unironic way. Like he said something about when he was being tailed by the detective when him and Kathy were first like having their love affair. He said that the detective was a good gumshoe, which I was like, what on earth does that mean? And it just means detective, but he was like completely serious while saying it. I was like actually funny. And then like just like little phrases like he says to Joe when they first like in that first scene when they're at the garage, he was like, "What are we gonna do? Chew the fat?" And like terms like that, like I knew about them, but seeing them used like unironically by a character as if they were like everyday phrases was like kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's similar thing. Oh, sorry.
I would say it reminds me of my grandpa, who I visit him in Michigan, and he says all these things unironically. And I just remember like I would zone out like having conversations with him because I just be like, I don't know what you're saying. Like this sounds something I would hear so sarcastic, and he meant it. Like he'd say chew the fat and
It's a bit of like a tonal shift because these things are like said in the text to make this character sound like very cool, very collected, and just like like a guy that you would almost like aspire to be, not in the getting involved in murder and crime part, but just in the sort of like the way that he carries himself and like the aura that he has. And like that's the effect that it would have on viewers back then. But like when we're watching it today, we really only see these things almost in like comedic or parody contexts. Like I don't know, like there's one line that I noted was, "I don't need a crack like that any more than I need your dough." And I'm like, who has called money dough seriously in like the last 20 years?
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like even with some of the sentences and like sayings we don't understand, just because of the time this was made, instead of like 2021 where we'd be like kind of laughing about this or it'd be like ironic. just because it's film noir and it's like black and white and it's like grainy and has all this music and stuff. Even when I don't understand her, I would think it's funny. I'm like, oh, this is kind of mysterious and like dramatic, and it adds to like the character.
Yeah. There was like some other like terms when he was talking about when he first went to Kathy's place in Mexico. And he said that it was a nice little joint with bamboo furniture and Mexican gimcracks. And I was like, okay, like just like you gotta just go with it. Like it was really interesting to see how they like actually talked in the 1940s, like portrayed through this.
Totally. And it wasn't even just when they were saying things out loud. Like he said a lot of Jeff said like a lot of these things even through the voiceover, you know. Like I remember when he was like, and she walked through the sunlight and like the moonlight, or like she walked through the sun, and it was like in his head, and I was like, whoa, this is a lot to not be saying out loud.
I mean, like, I think one thing that kind of like that strikes me with a lot of this dialogue is that like obviously it is using like vocabulary and slang that people really did use back then, but at the same time it doesn't really feel like how real people would have talked. You know, like we are obviously like watching characters on a screen, like there is a suspension of disbelief, but it's not really like realistic dialogue or realistic characters. These are very theatrical and they're very like dramatized, and that is to a degree part of the fun, like sort of like the almost like the escapism of noir, of like getting lost in this world that's full of like conspiracy and murder and crime and like shadows around every corner and all of that. And so I feel like the theatricism of it and sort of like the over the topness is part of the draw.
Yeah. And when taking notes while watching it, I just kind of noticed like a lot of like cultural things that came up in the dialogue, like besides just like vocabulary and slang. Like there was like a lot of like sexist stuff that they said in the movie, which like it's the 1940s, but still in that very first scene when they're in the diner and then the guy is trying to like seduce, or he's trying to like flirt with the lady behind the counter, and he says, I keep thinking of you as a blonde. And that's kind of like that kind of stereotypical like the blonde bombshell that was like seen as desirable. Or when Leonard Eels says something like all women are wonders because they reduce all men to the obvious. Like, and that also kind of plays into that femme fatale trope of how like they were kind of paranoid about like women and like manipulation to them, and like how they were like what they were doing behind closed doors, because now women had all this power and they were this scary entity instead of this like demure little submissive figure in society.
Really. One thing I feel like we can go off of that is kind of how this language can create certain tension. I think when I was watching the movie, I felt like the tension that was created was either like money tension, like angry tension, or like sensual tension. I was writing this series of sentences that went, don't you like to gamble? And then not against me, or not against the wheel. And this was between Jeff and Kathy. And then she said, tell me why you're so hard to please. And he said, take me where I can tell you. And this is like very indirect language, and kind of that we don't fully understand at the moment. But then we're like, oh, you know, this is like creating tension between characters.
Yeah, I think Jeff and Kathy had just like so much of that because of their obvious like falling out in their past. And like it's clear that attraction wasn't gone, and it was kind of clear in like the way they interacted too. I remember when Kathy first was like talking to Jeff in his bedroom when he got to like Whit's house, and he was like, get out of here, I gotta sleep in here tonight. And it's just kind of like little things like that like let you like know that there's still that tension between them, and that like innate sexual attraction that happens usually between the femme fatale and the anti-hero like is not gone, no matter how much Jeff says it is.
What I find funny about like a lot of the flirty, sensual dialogue is that like it is indirect, like nothing is overtly like explicitly stated, but at the same time, just like it is as subtle as a brick to the face. like, you know, there's everything is like not stated and implied, but it is implied extremely heavily, like to a degree that, like, you know, I guess like if a film was made today with that sort of dialogue between the two romantic leads, it would be seen as cheesy. But you know, like here it is a hallmark of the genre, of the not the genre, but just like a film noir of the movement.
It'd be like a Hallmark movie to have this
Yeah.
kind of action, like, because I wanted to say, like, I don't know if I just read it wrong, but like it seemed to me like Jeff was not as mad as he should have been at these people. Like, yes, he was like not
Yeah.
happy with them, but like if I was in Jeff's position, I'd be pissed. I wouldn't be like, yeah, okay, fine, I'll help you. Like, I would be like, no, you framed me for murder. And like, he's just like, okay, yeah, fine, whatever. And like, I don't know if that's like gonna be like a thing we see in all these film noirs where like the anti-hero is kind of like, all right, fine, I'll go with it. But like, I want to see these people just have like some common sense. But I know, like, if we had common sense in these films, it would not be a film. It'd be very boring.
Yeah.
But I also, it's just as aggravating to sit there and be like, sir, please, like, stop.
I mean, like, to a degree, I feel like that's another thing that's just like it almost feeds into, you know, like, this is a hard-boiled protagonist, this is a noir anti-hero. Like, they always have to be a little bit above it all, a little bit unaffected, and just sort of like, you know, like, wisecracking almost. Like, pretty much everything that comes out of Jeff's mouth is some kind of like zinger or comeback or something like that. Like, I remember this one time where he was like, it's early on when we first get that flashback of him explaining how he got involved with all of the crime stuff and with Kathy to Anne, like the current girl that he has in the present. And that sort of like deal that he's making, you know, like with Whit and with Joe in the beginning. And when like Whit calls him out for not speaking a lot or for speaking very sparingly, like the first thing that he responds with is, I never found out much by listening to myself. Like, it's just like always a comeback. He never says it like straight as it is. It's always some kind of wisecracker joke.
Yeah, I remember when him and Kathy were talking about, they were like sitting on the couch and Kathy was talking about how she didn't do the crime towards Whit, and she was like, oh baby, don't you believe me? And he was like, baby, I don't care. And I was like, it's like, you're not answering. It's always just like so indirect and like, yeah.
Mix the comic relief character with the main character and a lot of these things, because like every line that they say is sarcastic or like isn't really, it follows the plot, but not like, it also doesn't really like forward it a lot of the time. And it's like what you would see today is if like they had like, if they mix Liam Neeson and Jack Black is what I feel like, is if they put the two of them together in a film, but like in one person.
And I feel like that is kind of, to a degree, like what hard-boiled dialogue is. It's sort of like this power play between the two people in the conversation where like neither one of them really wants to like give up or sort of like be you know, like if you don't have something clever to say back to the other person, it's almost like you've lost. And it's like whether you're talking with, you know, like whether it's like Jeff and Kathy or like Jeff and any other male character, anyone.
Totally.
Yeah, there was one line that I kind of noticed where he was like doing like a little banter like back and forth, but he was like, I know I'm gonna say this and they're gonna be like, yeah, he's right, and they're not gonna have a comeback to it. It's when he was talking to Kathy and I think it was Joe, and he said, I'm gonna give you some time to go find her, and then I'm also gonna give you time to double cross me, but I know you're not gonna do it. Like he was kind of like in that like suave sense of like overconfidence that protagonists in these like 1940s movies like sometimes have, where he was like, you know, I'm gonna leave it open, but I know that I won by saying this line.
So he was asserting his dominance.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's totally about like confidence and dominance and like power and stuff. How it feels like, yeah, the only time that it's not like a back and forth like this is when it's between two people that don't have power over each other. So like, for example, Jeff and Whit like never have like a super normal conversation really, and then like Jeff and Kathy never really have like that normal of a conversation either. Yeah, it just feels like the only time that doesn't happen is when there's like no competition at all, you know.
Yeah, going back to Jeff and Whit's conversations, I found that like Witt kind of like slipped into the role of like the Riddler, and he was just like speaking in metaphors, that like long extended metaphors that I was like trying to decipher the whole movie. So the first one, when he was explaining to Jeff in that flashback scene, when he was like, listen, my girlfriend shot me, took my money, and then he like starts going into a metaphor about a horse, and he said, one time I spent $40,000 on a horse, but it got dead last, so I bought the horse and then I took it to some green pastures. Like obviously the horse is like a metaphor for Kathy, and like the fact that like he lost her, but like he still wants to bring her back for her own good.
See, but that also feeds into, I'm gonna put my little horse girl knowledge into this. I watched a lot of Saddle Club as a kid. When you like put a horse out to pasture, it's like you kill him. And so for me, that was one moment where I was like, oh shit, he wants to kill Kathy. Because, and also like, it also hints at like who it is. Like he's a bitter man, but he also has to win at everything. So like, yeah, the horse lost him a ton of money. So he bought it, which is like a power play for him. But then it's also like, hey, you dumb horse, you lost me a ton of money. And so it's like, I kind of was like, oh, that's what he's going to do to Kathy. So it also surprised me later when we find out Kathy went back to Witt where she was alive. And I was like, what happened to the horse metaphor?
Yeah, but I also think like a major thing with these femme fatale characters is that like them living is them like manipulating people, is them having the power, and Witt totally stripped her of that. She was like, you know, a little caged horse within like, you know, a fence. Like he like kind of took that freedom she had, and in a way that was like kind of like putting her down.
Yeah, it's sort of like it oh, sorry.
I just want to say like it could also hint at her manipulating Witt to keep her around, because she was also like, she was kind of making a lot of the moves when Jeff went back to work for Witt. She was making a lot of the plays. I don't know if Witt knew about that or not, but I think it could have hinted at like she was so good at being this femme fatale like manipulator that she was like, this man who's this like gangster, like he wants to kill her. She's like, I manipulated him into keeping me around. I'm that good.
Yeah, it's sort of like, I noted down like one line of dialogue. It's like, it's right near the end where like right before Jeff and Kathy are about to like make their escape, quote unquote, even though they don't. It's a setup. But he asks her, you know, like, oh, you're running the show now. And she says, yeah, I'm running the show. And sort of like the irony in that is sort of like, to a degree, yes, she is throughout like the I almost said throughout the film. Oh my god. Like, you know, and but you know, like the up until that point, to a degree, she's been pulling the strings. She's sort of been like she's been the smartest person in the movie, and sort of like been like playing all of the men around her. And it's specifically when Jeff asks her like, "Oh, are you running the show?" And he sort of like acknowledges that. It's just before she finally gets hers.
Yeah. I also had some like other like little weird metaphors that Witt decided to like throw into conversation. Like he was talking about I think it was his emotions, and he was talking to Jeff, and he was like, 10 years ago I hid them and I haven't been able to find them. You know, I've been looking in my wallet. Like he's clearly like this stereotypical gangster guy who solves everything by like throwing money at it. So I think that like just like little lines like that were like really interesting to like see like kind of like the symbolism and like the metaphor. And another, like, besides the slang and the symbolism, I guess you could say, I noticed a lot of lines about this reoccurring film noir theme of unsuspicion. Like there was like every other line, like a character was saying something that was in relation to this. And like now that I was kind of like hyper aware of it, I was like, oh, there's another one. And suddenly I had a whole page of like just examples of these quotes. And I actually have pulled up an example of one of these scenes, which is one of the first scenes, like right off the bat, we're hit with this theme of, you know, the unsuspecting bystander, of like unsuspicion. So let me just pull that up right now. Oh, wait, no, this is, sorry, this is not the right thing. There we go. Okay. So they're in the, so here's Joe when he first arrives to town, and he sees Bailey's name on it, and then on the gasoline station. And then the waitress says this. So I thought that line, everything people ought to know about the world they don't want to hear, was just so like in your face, unsuspecting bystander. That was like something I immediately wrote down.
I noted it as well. And sort of like while we were watching it back, something that I noticed personally is that, you know, like the fact that what's ironic about it is that we have this line that's like very on the nose for a theme that comes up a lot in noir of, you know, like everything people want to know they don't want to hear, like that unsuspicion thing. And it is specifically being said by someone who is outside of like the big main conspiracy criminal underworld of this film. It's being said by the oblivious bystander. So she doesn't know the true weight of her words, but the audience does. And likely, you know, people like Joe, who are also in the scene, they do know it, but she herself doesn't know, like, truly how important what she's saying is.
It's also, it's kind of funny because that, like, we focus on that part a lot, but she's also like, either that or you're on the wrong side of the counter. And then he's literally on the wrong side of the counter. Yeah, but it's just like a lot of like either really obvious and like so obvious that we're just like, oh, haha, and we don't even notice it, or it's like completely just like not a real sentence or like kind of philosophical, you know, because she's like, that's the problem with the world. And it's like so general and like,
that was like that line that followed the what everyone needs to know they don't want to hear thing was like, maybe you're on the wrong side of the counter. Like she is on the wrong side of the counter. She is outside of this whole like, you know, this perfect crime that no one else sees except the people involved in it. Like she is literally on like other side of the window. Like and this whole what people need to hear they don't want to see is that like we don't want to suspect that the guy pumping our gas was like works for a gangster and like has killed people or has done worse. Like we don't want to hear that, but like it's a hard reality that like I think a lot of like the side characters in these film noir movies are like very ignorant to, maybe purposefully. They just like turn a blind eye because you like obviously you don't want to believe these realities of the people in your life.
I mean, like to it. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I think it's also like the counter for me, at least I kind of took it as like symbolism of like, because Jeff Bailey to them in that town was just like the gas station guy. You know what I mean? Like, and then to all of us, like we find out later, like he is this, like he was in deep in this like gangster lifestyle and like he has seen people murdered and he has like all these secrets, but to like the people of the town, he's just like the gas station guy that's like really nice and you know, like the really nice girl in town is in love with him. And like, so it kind of just shows like how like secluded that like the people around these characters are from like all the events. And I think the counter like stands for that seclusion.
Yeah, the counter's like the divider in between.
Yeah.
And then talking about like, you know, because we were talking about, you know, like how it was brought up that, you know, the bystanders don't notice it, and to a degree they don't want to notice it. And like what I thought about was Anne, which is, you know, like Jeff's new girl, the good girl at home, that's gotten like kind of wrapped up in all of this tangentially because the man that she loves has, you know, like turned out to be at the center of this huge web of conspiracy. And one of her lines that I noted down was, it's when she and Jeff are in the car and he's sort of like driving, you know, like back to the deal, back to Whit and back to Kathy. And, you know, like he's reminiscing about Kathy and like all like, you know, like what they shared together. And Anne specifically says she can't be all bad, no one is. And I just think that's funny, sort of like fitting into her character of the bystander of like, even when she's being presented with, you know, like this woman murdered someone, she's like been manipulating all of this, she's hearing about like all these gangsters and all of these like, you know, hitmen and all of this stuff, and then she still says, you know, like no one is all bad, she can't be all bad, almost like, you know, even when it's being like showed like to her, you know, like right in front of her face, she still doesn't want to consider the possibility that like maybe sometimes some people just are bad.
I think also Anne is like the complete opposite of a femme fatale, and also like she's such, and I know we're not like on character analysis this week, but I just want to like deep dive on Anne for like a minute, because this woman has the patience of a saint. Because if I was sitting in a car with like my boyfriend or whatever, and he starts telling me about this love affair he had with this other woman, and I just sit there and be like, do you still love her? He's like, no. And then he's going back to her. And then later in the film, she's like, why don't you go back and make sure you don't love her and then come back? That woman has the patience of a saint. And that is such an opposite of femme fatale, because I feel like the femme fatale would just shoot him. I feel like she'd be like, all right, bye. And like, oh, so I just like, I feel like the way it's also like very like poignant of like the time period this character was written at, because it was just like they made her so one-dimensional and just like the supporter of this man, and like all the men are vying after her, but she's just being pulled from one, like by one man, like he's trying to pull her away from Jeff, and she's like, no, I love him, and she's just so one-dimensional and like so like just like speaks for how women of the time were written. You're either like this evil villainess or you have like no personality.
Yeah, it's sort of like the dichotomy of like a woman can either be independent or morally good, because if she's independent, she's got to be evil.
Yeah, I was gonna say you can like see that through the dialogue, because like the one dimensionality of like her dialogue versus Kathy's, and then it's like the only women that have more than like a few sentences or like a somewhat interesting dialogue or like evil and like
maybe and
for the wrong reasons, you know.
It might be how men were trying to portray women from like how they got back to the war, of being like, you can't be independent from us men now that we're back because then you're evil. You have to be so dependent on us men emotionally and physically, and then you're so great and you're lovely and all men will want you. And I like that's such like a time period of how like again how women were written at that time, and I just think it's so annoying.
And also like even Kathy herself, what I find interesting for her is that even, you know, like she does like embody, you know, like the femme fatale, very independent, very clever, pulling all the strings. But she herself in the actual film tries to downplay that almost, of sort of, you know, like sort of tries to, I don't know, I guess like damselify herself almost, because whenever Jeff confronts her, she always plays down her involvement or like how directly she's manipulating things. Like all these lines, like one of her lines is, I was afraid of him and afraid of what I'd done, when she references, you know, like stealing the 40,000 and like murdering someone. And then another one about, you know, like going back to Whit and working with Whit again. When Jeff confronts her there, she says, I couldn't help it. They made me sign it. I swear I couldn't help it, Jeff. Just sort of saying, you know, like, no, look at me. Like, I'm helpless. I can't do anything.
The only man she really shows her true colors to is Joe. And Joe is just a one-dimensional, like, murder for hire guy.
Yeah.
And that's the only man that really sees how like manipulative and evil, because he's the only guy she doesn't flirt with and be like, come on, like listen to me. She just orders him around, and that I don't know what that goes to show, but that goes to show something. I just can't verbalize it.
Yeah, I was gonna say Kathy even about saying like downplaying her roles. She even said it in front of Whit, and Whit knows like everything she did, you know, like she's like, oh, he made me, blah, blah, blah. Like she doesn't even care what Whit says, you know.
Yeah, she's so like worried with like her own agenda and what she wants people to think, like controlling the narrative, that she'll say anything to anyone in the moment if it's like beneficial to her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I had like I said, I had so many quotes just dealing with like unsuspicion, but also there was a lot of, I think we mentioned earlier, hard-boiled dialogue. So I feel like that was a big part of this movie, and I think I said the example that I had written down, but I was wondering if anyone else had some examples of that, because I think that's very like quintessential for this era.
Yeah, I mean, hard-boiled, well, what I kind of interpreted it as while watching the movie was like people asking questions and then the other characters like avoiding that by like indirectly answering it, or kind of trying to like flirt or somehow trying to avoid it. I guess that's the sentence I was saying about tell me why you're so hard to please, and then take me where I can tell you, or like the won't you believe me, and then I don't care. Like to me that seemed very hard-boiled.
Yeah.
I mean, and like I know that we mentioned this before, of like dialogue in hard-boiled films being sort of like a bit of a power play. You always have to say something clever, and if you don't say something clever, you've lost. Like one thing that's sort of like that, like dialogue in general in this film, I think sort of like what plays into the whole like hard-boiled dialogue thing is that while I was watching it, I noticed that like this film is definitely, it's a lot more, I guess, like reliant on dialogue and the individual chemistry and stuff between characters, and you know, like just how they say their lines, like how they carry themselves. It's a lot more heavily reliant on that than like other films that we've seen like the previous weeks and things like that. Like I just noticed, like comparing this to something like, I don't know, like Double Indemnity, not to say that like Double Indemnity's dialogue is like shallow or anything, but it just feels like in this film and Out of the Past, characters talk to each other a lot more and they talk to each other a lot longer. And it's like there's a lot more emphasis on the back and forth and like of almost this conversational fencing.
I think the difference is that in Double Indemnity, there's a lot of people they're hiding their crime from, versus in Out of the Past, like almost every character we see aside from like Anne really is involved in the crime. So they don't, except for like the whole double crime, everyone is a part of it. So there's less like, I think the lack of dialogue between the characters in Double Indemnity is like like it speaks for the fact that like they have to keep so much to themselves, like between the two of them in this film. Everyone's a part of at least part of this, even like the kid.
I feel like even though it's part of the time, like using so much slang and kind of hard-boiled dialogue might make them seem suspicious, you know? Whereas here they like don't care, so they're all just talking like that.
Sort of, it's like the language of people like that are in the know almost.
Totally. Yeah, and I feel like that's why Wit's especially dialogue is harder to understand, because he's like, at least in my eyes, like the higher power, like maybe one of the more guilty ones.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's like doing that whole like thing, like that Daphne said, like the whole power play thing. He was like, I'm gonna use these metaphors and these fancy words, and I'm gonna try and manipulate you to do my bidding.
Totally.
It's like it's like mansplaining kind of. It's like if I use bigger words and I use stuff that's hard to understand,
Totally.
he'll follow me because I sound smart.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like maybe if I describe my girlfriend as a horse, he'll go get her from Mexico for me.
Yeah.
Like that.
The sad thing is that there are definitely still men out there referring to women as horses today.
Yeah.
It's like women as animals.
Well, they also referred to her as a wild goose. I wrote that down.
Yeah.
I was gonna and I forgot, but I was like, how on like a wild goose when referring to like women are either like inanimate objects like leaves or they're animals. They're never like just like women
or crazy people.
Yeah.
Well,
there was another line that I had in specific about kind of unsuspicion, or I guess like the perfect crime, where when Jeff and Kathy are like first like in hiding, I guess after they run away from Mexico, they Jeff says the line, "We played it smart and forgot nothing." But like obviously like in noir you can't have that kind of hope. Like you have to have some type of, you know, you gotta know it's gonna go wrong. So I think that's just kind of like playing into that whole trope of like things can't go well for these characters, and like you kind of gotta know that. So like when he's
almost like
if we played it smart, like it's kind of foreshadowing the opposite.
Yeah, it's like whenever you see those types of lines in a noir, it's almost like you know, it's like a red flag of, you know, like whenever a character is saying that they forgot nothing, that they've covered all their bases, it's almost like a guarantee that they've forgotten something.
Exactly. Like 5 minutes later, like the guy who was tailing them shows up at their front door, and then suddenly they have to split. So
either you forget something or someone is like having like this like double cross moment. Haha, I'm actually on the other side. Like there's never
like,
a moment where something goes easy.
Or like someone comes to your door, but it's the last person you want to see. Like you think it's like it's the woman that you love, but it's actually a mob boss, etc.
Like another line in that like whole like sequence of like we ran away because we were in love. It was like it wasn't a 1 in a million chance we were gonna bump into someone from our past. Like the movie's called After the
I
Past.
wrote that one down too.
Yeah.
Like you kind of gotta put the
the moment he said like it was a 1 in a million chance, I was like, I know he's gonna be there.
He's gonna be that one.
Yeah.
It's like it's right after that Whit and like his entourage intercept him at the hotel, right?
Yeah.
It's like so on the nose.
I think it's after that, because didn't they run away together after Whit was like he surprised him at the hotel?
Yeah, wasn't it that Jeff was like going back to Kathy and then he was being followed and then he got followed into the house?
Yeah, he was followed by the gumshoe.
Yeah.
Gumshoe.
Yeah.
I'm gonna start saying that.
Yeah.
Just refer to Law and Order characters as gumshoes.
Yeah, exactly.
I need to look up like the origins of that phrase and just why it sounds
Now,
like that.
how on earth they got detective or like gumshoe from detective, I will never know. Maybe it's like 'cause you have gum on the bottom of your shoe.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna
and
say. It's probably
it's
because it like
always
sticks.
sticking with you.
Yeah.
Maybe.
And
We'll have to Google it.
like, you know, when there's something on the bottom of your shoe and you're like, what is that? Like, I feel like
Yeah.
that's kind of like the feeling of that you're being
Totally.
followed.
Yeah.
I just want to go, I'm so sorry for all my little tangents today, but I like, dived into the Wikipedia of this film. I think I realized why the kid at the gas station doesn't speak, and that's because he was a silent film actor. Dickie Moore was a really famous little kid in silent films, and I think that's why he didn't speak, because I was like, is the actor really deaf? Because like, ooh, like, you have, yeah, and then it's like, no, he's just a silent film actor. He probably don't know how to speak on camera. But then also, he didn't die till 2015. And that was, these all feel so long ago, and he was only 89 at 2015. So I don't know. My little Wikipedia deep dive into that guy was really interesting.
I think maybe they hired him because of that, but also like, I mean, I think it definitely went into the story, the fact that he didn't speak.
Yeah.
Just
Well,
not, yeah.
It's like representation for ASL, and then I was like, maybe they did have a deaf actor. Like, what if, and like, did they learn ASL or did they just memorize? No.
Representation in the 1940s is too good to be true.
I know. I was so hopeful. I was like, wow, film, and I was like,
I think those are all the lines that I had like specifically starred out in my notes. If there's anything that anyone else wants to like point out about like just something they thought was like interesting that they said or like unusual, I guess, because there was a lot of, I guess, like unusual or like hard-boiled lines in this film.
I mean, like, oh, go ahead.
I guess one last one in my list that I had was when they were at the beach, Jeff and Kathy, and he was like, are you going with me? And she was like, where? And he was like, wherever it takes us. And I feel like there's this whole sense of kind of like you have no idea what's going on, but neither do the characters, you know, and we kind of just go along with it. Yeah.
The wherever it takes us specifically is very ominous, and in hindsight,
it's like,
you know, like
very ominous.
Yeah, it's sort of like, oh well, look where it took you.
Yeah.
One of you's dead.
Yeah.
there's always those lines that hint towards like the end is gonna be like in the last Double Indemnity, it was till the end of the line or something like. Oh, also Captain America, but it's always those little lines where you're just like, oh, you said that, it's not gonna go well.
Yeah. Didn't they say something when they were about to run away where like Kathy was like, I'm the only one for you. Like we deserve each other. And then that's kind of when you know, like, something's going to happen in like the next like 5 minutes. And then they just die in a car crash.
It's also like, that's so insulting to him that you're the only thing he deserves. And you're
Well, I mean, like, I mean, like, for the, like, the film almost, because, like, I don't know, if you see it in the context of, like, you know, I'm the only one for you, when he's, like, sitting in the car next to, you know, like, the femme fatale, next to, like, the evil woman, and he's just left his good girl at home, like, he can't be with Anne, and it's almost like a confirmation of, like, once you're in this world, you're in it, like, don't think you're getting out.
Yeah.
Totally.
Anne deserved better anyways. Justice for Anne.
Justice for Anne. All right, so that's all that I had.
Me too.
Oh, I had to go.
Pretty good discussion today.
Yes, I love Googling these actors. I like, if you see me like looking down, it's because I'm like deep diving into the Wikipedia, because I'm like, I find like the director's name and then I just like deep dive.
Yeah, we could make that a thing, like noir trivia of the week, like something about the film, like that, like the definition of gumshoe, the fact that the actor wasn't actually a deaf actor, things like that.
The fact that he was a child actor and his Wikipedia showed him at like age 5, I was like,
I rewatched it on Amazon, and then I went to go press the little cast button, and then it just kept showing the kid and had a little kid, and I was like, there was no child in this movie. But
the fact that the one deaf character, no name, I was like,
he's known as the kid. He's like infantilized a little bit.
Boy.
Yeah, the boy.
Yeah, there's no, he doesn't have a name. He doesn't have, I'm not gonna go on a rant, but I could.
Just like the way that Joe refers to him, like when he realizes that he's deaf, he's like, oh, deaf and dumb, huh? And I'm like, did you just excuse me?
And he just goes, yeah.
Totally.
All right. Well, I'll see you guys next week.
Cool. Oh, okay, bye. Wait,